Hello, beautiful listeners. It's your host, Tembi Locke. Welcome to Lifted, a podcast that pulls back the curtain on creativity, resilience, and the extraordinary moments when everything changes. Lifted listeners, I am thrilled to welcome the incredible Cheryl Strayed. Cheryl is the acclaimed author of books like the New York Times bestseller Wild and Tiny Beautiful Things, both of which have been adapted for screen. Plus, she's an award-winning essayist, an advice columnist, and host of the Dear Sugar podcast. Cheryl, let's just speak plainly, she's a literary and a human force of nature. And her words have resonated deeply with readers and listeners and viewers around the world. In our conversation, we dive into the transformative journey that inspired Wild, a memoir that chronicles her solo trek across the Pacific Crest Trail in her mid-20s, following a divorce and the passing of her mother. Cheryl's candid reflections on her personal struggles, the challenges of loss, and her pursuit of healing through nature are not just compelling, they have inspired countless women to embark on their own adventures, facing their fears and reclaiming their lives in the process. Now, I was particularly struck by Cheryl's reflections on how travel can serve as a metaphor for life's journeys. We talk about the importance of embracing the unexpected in our travels and how the lessons we learn along the way can be just as significant as the destinations we reach. We also discuss how travel, both physical and emotional, can lead back to oneself, creating the opportunity for groundbreaking self-discovery and personal growth. But it's Cheryl's ability to articulate the complexities of grief and resilience that serve as a guiding light for so many. If you find yourself, as you listen to this, in a crossroads, or you're longing for a sense of adventure or a deeper connection to yourself, Cheryl's journey, her insights, will encourage you to embrace the unknown, trust your own path, and that might include a little travel along the way. Let's settle in and let's get into this beautiful conversation. Cheryl Strayed, welcome to the Lifted podcast.
It is so wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, Cheryl, I am so delighted. I have had the privilege of meeting you first virtually. Well, let me back up. First in your books. So there's that. Your words before I met the human behind the words.
And that's how I met you too.
Yes. But the human is actually in your words. And that's a part of why your words resonated so beautifully around the globe. Then I had the chance to meet you virtually during the pandemic for a Hello Sunshine event. I think we did a conversation at the time. Of course, it was the middle of the pandemic, so I barely recall the conversation. But I remember, as Maya Angelou said, how you made me feel. And I remember, and I, from scratch, had barely come out. And the way you met me for the first time digitally, and we were able to talk, I felt really, just honored as a new writer who was sort of like, had my book just come out. And then, of course, we met in person about a year ago. And it's always...
We were both promoting shows and things for
the
adaptations of our books. Yeah.
And so I really, as I was saying before we started recording, this season is a lot about travel. And I think that the beauty of sitting down with you today, and for the purposes of today's conversation, I think we can go a lot of places with this, but I want to begin with the question that I've been asking a lot of the guests this season, which is, what is your memory of your first trip? What are your first impressions of travel?
That is such a great question. I don't know that I have ever been asked that somehow. So I love to answer it. And I'm going to just go really with the very first thing that came to mind. And I think it must have been the first time that I was on an airplane when I was about 5. I was born in Pennsylvania, in Western Pennsylvania, in coal mining country. My father and his family lived there and were coal miners, had immigrated to the United States, about 100 years ago. And I was born in that little community. And when I was about 5, my mother and father, who were still married at the time, decided to move away from this little town in Pennsylvania where my sister and I had been born. And we moved to Minnesota, of all places. A lot of people who've read my work or who know me think, they would say, oh, Cheryl's from Minnesota. But the little, factoid about me is I was born in Western Pennsylvania, in Appalachia. And I remember that sense of just incredible, like, wonderment and adventure. For one thing, some of my first memories are the people in Pennsylvania saying goodbye to us and everyone saying, you're going to this cold land, and, giving us the gifts of like mittens and scarves. And then getting on this airplane, and I have this memory in my mind's eye of being this little kid and like looking out the window, and it was night, and just the darkness and the wonder I felt, the kind of shock of being able to go in the air and to fly. And when we landed, I remember getting off the plane and thinking like, the next part of my life begins. Wondering what will my life be here. And I still to this day treasure that aspect of travel, that it can often mark a new chapter. Even if we're just going away for a week and coming back home, it can symbolize to us something bigger.
I love what you share, this like threshold moment, right? Between the life you were leaving, the family you were leaving, and then whatever would unfold and would become. And, in so much of your writing, you were telling us these stories of journeying, right? And
yeah,
you have talked about Wild a great deal, but it's in Torch, it's in Tiny Beautiful Things. There are these many kinds of journeys that we take. Travel is expanding some part of who we are, but particularly when you write memoir, what do you think is the journey that you take as a writer? From that first, this is a thing I need to discuss or I need to explore, and then the journey from the idea of what it might be to what it is. That's a big question, but I kind of want to
we could spend like a year going, okay, let's talk about that. But I think I love that you can see that in my work. I would say that the journey, if I had to just pick a few words that are sort of core to the kind of writing that I do, is absolutely journey is at the center of it. And I know sometimes we can make fun of that word, oh, everything's a journey. And yet it's true. In my first novel, Torch, I really very much write about the journey of grief. Obviously you write about that as well. That to me, journey transcends place. Like sometimes the journey is both about, like in Wild, I'm traveling across, a country on foot on the trail. I'm also, I think the bigger journey, I'm traveling within myself, processing that thing we all have to do as we grow and evolve, and that is moving from one place to the other, which is inherently an act of risk-taking and discovery. And I think that correlates absolutely to writing, that I'm writing a book right now that's actually, now that you mention it, very much about journeys. It's a memoir in which I write about various trips I've taken over the years and the transformations that they brought about in me. And part of that transformation that I've always experienced, on whether that be a journey in the real world or a journey within grieving or a journey as a writer trying to find that story, has to do with trusting myself, with trusting that more will be revealed, that as much as we like to plan things, but my favorite thing is then you get there and what actually happens is that act of discovery. The more will be revealed piece, the things that you can't plan for. And that's true in writing too. You begin a book with an idea, a desire, to say something, to share something. And, when I teach writing, I always say like, if you end up where you began, that book is going to be dead. That part of life and part of writing is being awake to the things that can only emerge by chance, or by trusting your intuition, or following the path that at first seems to lead nowhere, or even sometimes to lead in the wrong direction.
I thank you for that. I'm in the middle of a project also that has to do with a trip. So you and I are yeah,
Again,
totally, completely
nonstop.
Cheryl on so many levels. And it has been 4 different things. It's always been about the same thing, but it's been about 4 different things. So clearly the truth of what's underneath, the thing that is needing to be expressed, revealed to me, is still in its unfolding. And
Absolutely.
it's like, it's uncomfortable to sit in it. Sometimes I want to run away from it. Sometimes I want to wield it into the thing that I want it to be. And
Yeah.
it's like, it's like being in a relationship with someone that you want to change them into the thing. No, they're going to be with it. The book is going to be, this story is going to be what it's going to be. Even the unfolding of it, I wanted to and I'm wrestling with this one, and it's a good thing.
I mean, has there ever been a book? I've never had a writing project that I didn't wrestle with. But what's interesting to me about what you just said is, so you said it's been 4 different things. And I know that when that happens, at least for me, and I think it's pretty universal, it can kind of feel like a failure. It can kind of feel like you're going down the wrong track. And what I've learned in life and in writing and travel and in books is that actually, you really have to trust and sit in that sense of disappointment and failure in order to get to that place where you're actually achieving the success and sort of you're actually getting that thing that you wanted, from the beginning.
And sometimes when it's a cacophony, it becomes a traffic jam. And it's funny, I was going to ask you this later, but this is a perfect segue to ask you about this. I recently read in one of your latest and last newsletter, I think it was number 46, as I remember. You talk about, so I won't get into what the letter is about, which was also about travel. So anyone who doesn't subscribe should subscribe, go listen, go read, excuse me. But at the very end of this beautiful response to these two inquiries about actually the nature of travel and their lives and relationships. Okay. So go read that, listeners. However, at the end of it, you gave us this great tool. You talk about how when the stuff is going on in the brain and there's so much that's happening, you're trying to tease out, what do you want? What is being said? What is seeking to be lived? You have this exercise of getting a giant piece of butcher paper.
Yeah.
Putting it on a table and
On the floor.
literally on the floor, whatever, vomiting out, writing out, free form, unedited, everything. It's like data dumping what's in the brain. So then you can look at it. It's like a map of what's happening in your mind. I'm telling you, Cheryl, when I read this, I was in Sicily recently, and I was working on something, this same project that I've been referring to. And I was like, the thoughts are coming. I feel like it's all happening. And I came across your newsletter, as I always do, and I read it. And I thought, oh, Tembi, get the butcher paper. Do what Cheryl says to do.
Yeah.
It's helpful, right? Because then you literally talk about, you have a map of words that are telling you what your mind is attempting to sort of parse out or make sense of. And then you can begin to sort of navigate it all.
Absolutely. And I love, and the big butcher paper is an important piece of it, because
Tell me why.
you're likening it to a map, because I do too. It is like a map of your life. And I can't tell you how many times that has been useful to me. And even if I can't always act on what I see on that page, one of the ways that it has been really helpful to me is, and I think one of the things I said to these two people who, you would have been the perfect question or a person to help me answer that question, you having been in a relationship with somebody who grew up in a different culture than you. And that's what's the situation in both of these letters. But, this idea that sometimes we want 2 different things, or we feel one way about our lives, and like we aspire to have a certain kind of life, but then we're doing the opposite thing. we can talk about all the good things that we do to take care of ourselves or whatever, but then here we are not taking care of ourselves. And I think that, you know, putting our intentions, our fears, our desires, our, you know, visualizations, like, what do you visualize? Like, to you, you know, what's a happy life to you? What does a happy life look like to you, Tembi? And write down all the words that come to mind when I ask you that question. And I promise that something will rise from them, you know? And I do think that that's powerful stuff. And this is why I always, you know, I believe that writing is medicine. This kind of thing I'm talking about, it's basically list making, but list making is writing. And it's putting into words or phrases or sometimes sentences um, that deepest inner voice within you. And I absolutely believe that the more any of us listen to that voice, I call it my wise inner sage, you know, as often as possible, when I can let that wise inner sage guide the boat, the boat of the Cheryl Strayed boat, the better off I am.
That listening is really, really, really important. It was funny because when I did it, I was like, "Ooh, that was a lot. I need to go take a nap." Intuitively, I knew I needed a rest.
Mm-hmm.
Later that day, I was looking out and there were these sparrows. Passeri is the name of the bird in that part of Sicily. And I watched how they would fly in groups, but then one would separate, rest, join back up into the activity, rest. And I thought, okay, Tembi, just do what the damn bird is doing. Like the bird isn't overthinking it. The bird is like, I have the work to do that I do in the world.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to take a beat and I'm going to rest. And I found that it helped me re-enter the work. It helped me re-enter my life in a much more grounded place because I had journeyed through all the words in my brain and the deepest desires.
Yeah, well, what you brought everything that's up here in the mind, in the worried mind. And you know, that kind of writing I'm talking about, it comes from, I mean, I'm touching the sort of my solar plexus, really, that the ground, I call that the ground level. Like that is, you know, that gut level where your wise self does live. And it's the one who doesn't worry because you know, we all know, I think on a gut level, if we, you know, can get quiet and genuinely listen, that we can trust ourselves and that we do have the capacity to see things through, to make good on our intentions, to finish the projects. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have the power for those projects to be like the most brilliant thing ever made, or to be bestsellers, or to be hits, or whatever, but we do have the power to get the work done. Our minds think like, if I worry about everything, I'll make it better. You actually will make it worse. If I try to control everything, it will be perfect. It will actually spin totally out of control. You know, the more that you can stay on the ground level and trust that wisdom within you, in writing and life, things will go better.
Stay at the ground level. How anchoring is just the sound of those words, to stay at the ground level.
Mm-hmm.
From that place, what you are able to do, and I think what great memoir does, it is so, you are so damn intimate on the page.
Mm.
And, you know, you have made the distinction, and I'll repeat something you said, which is intimate versus confessional, meaning it's not like, here, let me just tell you the worst, most difficult, challenging, trauma, you know,
Right.
based thing that ever happened to me. It's not, I'm not just telling you. What I'm doing is inviting you into the ground level of what the damn thing felt like. And the bittersweet of it, the emotion of it. And so in your process, is that staying at the ground level, is that what allows for that deep intimacy to come forward on the page? Because I think so many people, writer or not writer, are just seeking to be more intimate in their lives. That is why they write to you. You know, and just people are seeking a kind of deep intimacy with their own lived experiences, their own heart, their own ideas, their friggin' soul, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, one of the things I talk a lot about when I teach writing, and not just memoir, but fiction writing too, is that, you always really, the best writing happens from a place of deep consciousness. That's what makes our work deep and universal. And the first thing I mean about that is, that when I am going to write something that's very personal, very intimate, something that can seem confessional, like this is the worst thing that happened to me, or this is a terrible thing, is that I'm never doing it from that kind of surface level that says, because something terrible or exciting or awful or traumatic happened to me, this is the story worth telling. I always have to bring it, there we go again, down into the depths of my deepest wisdom, and contemplate the ways that that experience that I'm going to share with you is ancient and universal and true in some way for all of us. So, for example, grief has been something that I have written a lot about. Losing my mother, she died at 45 when I was a senior in college, and it was, the great loss of my life. And the ways that I've written about that over the years, it has always been with the consciousness of that I'm writing into those truths that are universal, and is universal stories about what it means to lose somebody who is essential to you. So I think that the first thing you said to me, Tembi, when we corresponded was, I read Wild, and I felt my grief. I saw my grief in your grief. And you and I had very different kinds of losses in some ways. And you lost your husband, I lost my mother, all of those differences, but none of that mattered. Because and I felt the same way then when I read your book, the things that you said about what that feels like rung the bell of truth. Those words rung my bell of truth that lives within me. And this is the power of literature. This is the power of art, is that across all kinds of divisions, we can write about what it means to love and lose and try again and fail and travel and experiment and have joy and have babies and lose ideas about ourselves that we used to have. All of those things are in some way tapped into, of course, a universal human experience. So my rule for that kind of intimacy is write with profound specificity, really, whether that be about yourself or your character. Very, very intimate, specific stuff, but always with the consciousness that the story is never, ever just about you or your character. Because if you only stay up there, like, oh, I'm so interesting, so pull up a chair, it's going to be a very shallow story. Very few people will see themselves in it.
Yeah, I do want to circle back and say, absolutely. I've said it before, I will say it again. And every time I meet you, I will tell you a version of the same exact story, which is Wild landed in my life at the exact moment. I know you've heard this from many people, but what I saw and what I thought was, as many of us did when we first picked up the book, a book about a woman walking a trail. And I was like, I am never in 1,000 lifetimes going to do this thing. But everybody says it's a great book. I'm going to read it. Baby girl, I was on page, like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5. I was like, this ain't a book about a trail.
That's right.
This ain't a book about a trail, people. And it met me at the exact moment where I was navigating the loss of my husband, love of my life, father of my child. And what you gave me was permission. What your book did, the intimacy of it, the universality of it, was this permission to walk along the trail with you as you figured out a path forward. And so I thank you for that, for the intimacy you've given all of us and the language and permission to grieve, to grieve, to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to go back to what you talked about being an artist and the role of art itself. You talked earlier about your father being and from a family of coal miners.
Mm-hmm.
And the labor. I heard you talk about the labor of coal mining. In my neck of the woods, my dad talks about picking cotton. That's where, East Texas, where we come from. What does it mean, or can you talk about honing craft? And the reason why I bring up coal mining and picking cotton is that people are getting to the work of what needs to be done. And I think if you take that approach, coal mining, picking cotton, to your writing, and you've also talked about, running at the speed of your own engine, just go, just do. I don't think we can you speak to that? Because I think we all need to hear it at different moments. Just do the work of coal mining, do the work of picking the cotton.
That's right. And I mean, absolutely. There's even a quote in my Dear Sugar column that's kind of taken on a life of its own, right? Like a motherfucker. I'm not sure if we're allowed to swear on this.
You are, you can, it's fine.
Where I say like, writing is hard, coal mining is harder. But and then the next line is, but it's a little bit like coal mining in that, you can't stand around and bitch about how hard it is. You just have to dig. And I think that, I very much, I think that commitment is a serious aspect of being a writer. And that is about deciding that you're going to have to show up for work, even when you don't want to, even when you feel like you can't, even when you feel like everything you've done that day adds up to nothing and you're tormenting yourself. The only way that any of us, keep moving forward is by doing the work. And of course, what happens for me all the time is that I have a lot of resistance before I begin. And then once I get rolling.
What does that look like? What is Cheryl Strayed resistance before you begin look like?
Oh
Because
gosh, are you
I think
kidding?
I know what it means. I clearly know what it means for me, because my resistance can look like dishes. It can look like cooking. It can look like getting the space. It has
Organizing
so
your
many forms.
closet, the internet. I mean, come on. But I do have to be disciplined. And I think that's what I mean about part of writing is commitment. You have to make a decision. And again, I'm going to use this phrase again. I think one of the essential pillars of happiness is making good on your intentions. When you say, it's basically saying you're actually going to walk the talk. And as all these years as Dear Sugar has really taught me this, and also in my own human life, that I find when I feel the most decentered, dislocated, dissatisfied with myself is when I've been saying out loud or to myself that I want to do something and doing the other thing. So if I'm saying, I want to write my next book, and then I just sit around and spin my wheels, I feel terrible about myself. I feel ashamed. And so I try to remember that too. I try to remember, like, you are going to feel good about this in an hour when you've been writing for an hour, even if the writing's not good.
Okay, that is advice that I think we can all take to the bank. That's a check that will cash and it will gain interest and compound over time. That's
right.
Good sage wisdom. Anyone who's read your work, any part of your work, anywhere in books, on screen, in essays, as letters, in the keynotes you've done, there's poetry in your work. And I want to read a quote from a book, a poem. And I want you to share with us what this means to you. The quote is, "Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses, only waiting to see us act just once with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is, in its deepest essence, something helpless that wants our love."
It's so beautiful.
It's so beautiful. And I think this is what you're talking about, is all the dragons, that are distracting us and all the things. If they're just princesses calling us to our deepest essence, to something that wants love.
I love that sentiment. And I do think, that is the sentiment that we're constantly turning over and revealing if we're paying attention to our lives. It's certainly the thing that has happened to me time and time again when I travel, and time again when I write. One of the things I talk about is I encourage people to go back and and you know, remember those ancient stories that are kind of that we've received in the culture all of our lives, all around us, these ancient stories and fairy tales. And very often they are grappling. I mean, even when you just say that all the dragons are princesses, I mean, think about all the ways in fairy tales that we see, you know, the frog is actually a prince, or the woman who appears beautiful is actually a monster, or the reverse, you know, that somebody who looks like a monster is going to possess the greatest wisdom and beauty. And you know what I love about fairy tales is that it very much evokes so many of the journeys that we're on. A fairy tale almost always is about a powerless person moving to power, and they almost always have to get there on their own with the help of trusted strangers, and by really ultimately having to walk through their fear and their suffering and find their courage and their strength. The other thing about fairy tales is almost always what appears to be a blessing is actually a curse, and what appears to be a curse is actually a blessing. And so that kind of dichotomy that we've been, you know, writers throughout the ages have been exploring and uncovering and writing about for all time. The reason that we're doing that isn't just because we're making up dramatic things out of air. It's because that's what it is to be human. I remember one of the first essays I wrote about my mother, my grief. And I got an email from a man who said, I hope that you see that you're great, you know, this greatest wound that you received when your mother died young is also your greatest gift. And I did see that. I did see that by that time. And of course, that doesn't in any way mean that I would go back in time and say, okay, let's leave her dead. I would say, no, I want my mom back. But you don't get your husband back. I don't get my mom back. So then what's our work? Our work is to make a gift. Our work is to make a blessing of the greatest curse. And people do that. Everyone I know who has triumphed or saved themselves or found their path or felt broken and found a way to wholeness has done that. They have made their deepest curses their greatest blessings. They've made beauty of the ugly thing. They've looked into the face of the monster and seen a shimmering, magnificent, beautiful face gazing back at them. And so, you know, I think all of that when I read that Rilke poem, and so much to me, it speaks of, you know, the work you and I are here to do as writers and humans.
You know, I did not know until after From Scratch came out, because literally I was just writing to sort of like put this raw experience on the page. And by the way, the writing of it changed me because I did the thing I endeavored to do, the intent to express it. And I knew that I had healed a part of myself simply by writing it long before anybody read it, right? So my
no matter
work,
what happens to the book,
no matter what happened, my
it was
work
worth
was
it.
done. For me internally, the grieving mother, widow, woman, daughter who started to that first, you know, chapter, I was not the same woman at the end. I knew I could endeavor to do the hard thing. What later happened, similar to what you just shared, is as readers have come back to me through both the book and the adaptation, is what I realized is that I was able to alchemize that grief into something that has touched others and has actually, writing about the hardest thing, has come back to me as the greatest gift. At the very just practical least, I'm talking to Cheryl Strayed on the Zoom today. You know, and that is a gift that only came to me, this moment, that this one precious moment that you and I have, because I did something very hard.
Yeah. I mean, you think about that, you know, those days that were just the bottom, and you just thought, like, this will never be anything but horrible. This will never be anything but a devastating loss. And, you know, there is a piece of that that's true. But the bigger truth, the wider story is like, you really genuinely made something powerful and beautiful from that devastating experience, and that transcended your own life. that didn't just help you. It was great the book healed you, but then when you bring the book into the world, it's beyond us. Like, a lot of exciting things have happened to my books in the world. None of them come close to the powerful meaning that I feel when a reader looks at me and says, "Thank you, you changed my life. You made me feel seen." That is absolutely like the highest achievement of my professional life.
You know, we've been talking a lot about traveling and writing and how they intersect and function in similar ways in our lives. Is there a trip that you've taken with the intention of healing?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right? And then, if so, where and what did you find?
Yeah. So, well, obviously, one of them was everything I wrote about it in Wild. So I won't talk about that. I found a lot of healing. If people want the answer to that, they can read the book. It's a long
Go
answer.
read the book.
But more recently, so I have a brother and sister, and ever since our mom died, it's been hard to stay connected like a family. It's many times when, our mom was a single mom, and many times, I mean, we had a stepfather, but once she died, our family really fell apart. And this is really common, when the central parent dies, very often the family has a difficult time sticking together. And that has been the case with my brother and sister and I. But I love them both and they love me. And a few years ago, I got in touch with my sister, and we hadn't seen each other for honestly, like 10 years. We've seen each other maybe once or twice in 20 years. And her name is Karen. And I said, "Karen, why don't we fly to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and rent a car and drive to Cambria County, where we were girls together, where I was born, where, she moved there when she was a baby, and then I was born there. And like I said, I spent the first 5 years of my life there before we moved to Minnesota. She spent the first 8 years of her life there. Our earliest first memories are there. And hard stuff happened to us. Our father was abusive, physically abusive, and my sister and I were sexually abused by our grandfather. And I said, let's go, back to this place where we were young, and let's just see what we find. And we went and we visited we drove up and parked outside the house where we lived with our parents and our grandparents. We went to the cemetery where we found our grandparents' graves and also other family members. We drove to the little tiny hospital where I was born. We went to the local drugstore and bought cheap bracelets with our initials on them. And we just talked about everything. And we released a lot of things. We sat at our grandfather's grave and talked to each other about what he had done to us as little girls. And it was so healing. It was so healing to remember again, what my sister and I endured together, and also what we survived, because we are both thriving, and we've each raised two beautiful kids of our own. And we mothered the way our mother mothered us. And we didn't father the way our father fathered us. And there was this tremendous sense of like love and connection and healing. Like there was a kind of the trip was about gathering in, because in some ways I had never been back to that place since I was 5. Once we got on that plane to Minnesota, I'd never gone back and visited, because my parents broke up shortly after that, and then we were estranged. So it was both returning and releasing, and there's really nothing more healing than that.
That is extraordinary, and it resonates so deeply, so deeply. Thank you for sharing that. Because the show is called Lifted, and you open Wild with a gorgeous metaphor and real obstacle, which is you're in this motel and you have your gear to hit the trail, and you put it in the backpack, you pack it up, and then you suddenly realize you cannot lift the backpack. You cannot lift it. And yet somehow you lifted and you walk out the door. This podcast is a lot about zeroing in on these moments where we want to lift each other up, where there's something challenging and difficult, some endeavor, some desire, some healing that needs to be done. And we are seeking to lift each other up. And I hope in these conversations that is happening so that we all can endure and navigate this thing called life. But I want to ask you, Cheryl Strayed, who has lifted you up in your life recently?
Oh gosh, what a great question. It's, I feel so lucky because what happened, when you asked me that question, what immediately happened is I felt just this tremendous gratitude for the many people in my life who I feel lifted by. Part of when I talked about like set your intentions and make good on them, one of my deepest intentions is to love and be loved, to find the people who do lift me up and to lift others up in turn. And I will say, I think foremost among them, I have to say my husband, Brian, we met 29 years ago tomorrow. So
happy anniversary.
Thank you.
That was 6 days off the trail or something like that.
Yeah, I
right?
was like, that's right. I was 9 days off the trail.
9 days.
Married for 25 years. And I have to say, if like when what I really marvel at when I go back in time and I think of like that day I married Brian, I was like, I love him so much, and wow, I hope this works out. I knew enough to know, like, you can't see into the future. You don't know what's going to happen, right? And the beautiful, beautiful, deep surprise and wonderment to both of us is just how much we love each other in an ever deepening way. And that just feels like, honestly, one of the greatest strokes of luck, one of the greatest gifts of my life.
Cheryl, this has been a heart-centering, grounding, joyous, ebullient, full, throttled, loving, dense, miraculous conversation. And I thank you for being with me today. It is a privilege to spend time with you. And I am just so grateful for your work in the world and the beautiful way that your heart pulses and your mind churns, and you unite those things in service of humanity.
Thank you, my dear.
Oh,
it is always
yeah, just
my heart is always full when I'm in your company, whether it be on Zoom or in real life. And I just really have enjoyed our conversation. I feel like we went to a lot of really interesting places. And thank you so much for bringing your words to the world on the page and on this podcast in so many ways that powerfully lift others.
Lifted is developed, written, and produced by me and my one-woman producing team, Celia Cates. It is edited by Jamie Moss. Thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for our next inspiring episode.